good evening and welcome to your very own Byju's 9th and 10th grade channel. I'm your teacher Aishwarya and I welcome you to today's class where we are going to be discussing the chapter, The Story of Village Palampur. Now, of course, in this particular video, we will be doing a full chapter explanation and we will go in great detail because this right here is the first chapter that is there in economics, and of course, we are going to be discussing it in great detail. Now, as you know, this particular class is being live streamed. So for my students who are probably watching this video much after the live stream, you can quickly skip to the part where I start teaching the chapter. But for all of my students who are live and who are here with me, I hope my audio, my video and my screen and whatever I'm writing on the screen is visible to all of you. If it is, students, give me a quick thumbs up to let me know that we are good to go, right? Yes, this was a very, very important chapter that all of you wanted. And as you all know, I know that this particular chapter was not covered for your periodic test, which is why we prioritize the periodic test, right? I mean, we prioritize this particular chapter explanation. Everything is good to go. Awesome. All right. So, of course, everybody, right, as we all know, in this particular class, we are going to be covering the full chapter explanation. So if we have to do this properly, I need you to make sure you have your notebooks, you have your textbooks ready with you. Please make sure that all of you have a pencil and a highlighter ready as well, right? If not a highlighter, a pencil and an eraser. And of course, students, I need you to have a water bottle ready because today's class might extend up to 1.5 hours, right? Because as we all know, this particular chapter is quite a big chapter. But at the same time, this right here is a very easy chapter. It's just that so far, when up until 8th grade, you did not really have the concept and idea of economics. Now, we're going to get started with something very new for all of you, which is why maybe for all of you to get an idea of what this chapter is about may take you some time. But trust me, if you've read this chapter, this is a very, very easy chapter, right? And if this chapter has been completed in your school, this is going to be a good revision for all of you, right? And as we all know, I want to make sure that you have a quiet place so that you will study. Yes, we will do chapter 2 of geography as well, but we will do one chapter at a time, right? All of you want all the chapters, so this is going to be very difficult for me, right? I'm trying my best. So at this moment, we'll finish one chapter in economics and then go back to the second chapter in geography. So are we all clear? Yes? Are we all clear and are we all good to go? I don't want to waste too much time in the beginning because I want to make sure that as quick as possible I'm able to wind it up. So of course I will do chapter explanation and I will also be telling you what kind of questions will come from each topic. So I have textbook references pasted so that as and when you want to write it down, you will be able to do it, right? Yes, this is for class 9, not for class 10. Yes, so everybody, if you are all excited for today's class, very quickly, please hit the like button on this video and do not forget to hit the subscribe button. In case if you are very new to the class, then I would suggest you watch the video and see where it goes, and I know that all of you here will understand it. So this right here, of course, right, when we talk about this particular chapter, which is the story of village Palampur, mainly it talks about the ideology of production, right? So in this particular chapter, what is it that we're going to learn? We'll get an idea of the importance of production, what are the factors that contribute towards production, what is the importance of agriculture, what are the, traditional methods, what are the modern methods, right? So there are a lot of things that you've probably studied from me in biology itself, right? When I would have taught you crop production and management in 8th grade. It's just that we'll probably look at this whole ideology in a very different angle when it comes to economics, okay? So without wasting any more time, students, we will get started. And before I get started with this whole chapter and the story, right? I'm sure that either in the news or in the, maybe newspapers or maybe in some articles, you would have seen these terminologies come into the picture, right? You would have heard the word economic growth. You would have heard about how economy is stronger, or there could be some economic crisis in some area, right? We all see this in the news articles. This is not very new to us. This word is something that we constantly keep seeing right from our lower grades. And we say that, oh, the economic conditions are very good, so this country is thriving, or oh, the economic conditions are not so great, which is why we see that this country is, having some struggle. So we are not going to look at economic crisis analysis today, but rather we'll understand what do we mean by the word economics, or rather I would say what do we mean by economy. What do you understand by it? Yes, before I tell you what is the definition, what do we understand by the word economy? Yes? What do you understand by the word when you say economy of a country is stronger? So Abhimanyu tells me, ma'am, economics is the subject that deals with the economy. Okay. Everybody said, ma'am, economy means something to do with money. Okay, maybe with respect to financial conditions, right? Money of the country, financial status. Okay, wealth of a country. Very good. Now think about it in a slightly different angle. Now you're talking about wealth and financial conditions, and we know that in order to lead a quality life, right? Now the kind of life with respect to maybe good amenities, maybe having the ability to go to good schools and all of that, maybe we require money, right? But it's also about how is it that we're going to generate all of this money. It's not that money will just come. We need to also think about how we generate this money, right? Now imagine if I'm a businesswoman and I want to, generate some money. What will I do? If you are a businessman / woman along with me, what is it that you will do? You will go to work, okay? Aishwarya ma'am is coming to work every day so that Aishwarya ma'am can make some money. Fine. All right. But what else? I'm talking about if I'm a businesswoman. I will do business. I will have schemes. Somebody, Priya tells me, ma'am, I need capital. Okay. Very, very good words. Production. Exactly. So see, we're going to start with things that you know. I'm not going to start with directly telling you what is what, right? You need to also think by yourselves. So when you talk about economy, right, or when you talk about the word economics, we see that the economy here refers to production. It is, talks about consumption and the distribution of goods and services in a specific region. And the study that is concerned with the production, the distribution and the consumption of goods and services. Now, when you think about goods, don't think about what are goods. Goods are nothing but, it could be anything. It could be a packaged material. It could be a food item, right? So here when we talk about it, when we talk about goods, it's basically what we produce, right? Services are basically, for example, things like teaching, bank services, right? You have a lot of, tailors and how they provide those kind of services. These are all things that we understand as services, right? So we know what is an economy and we also know what do we understand as economics, right? Are we all clear? Now, I understand that a lot of students in the live class here are quite distracted. See, like I always tell you, if you don't want to pay attention right now and you want to watch later, you can watch later. But students here are very, very serious about studying. So I request you to pay attention, right? So we are clear. When we talk about economics or economy, it includes production, distribution. That means you have to send it to different parts. Consumption. What is consumption? See, when you are buying a milk packet from the shopkeeper, or when you are buying a phone, or when you are maybe buying probably a bed sheet, right? You are purchasing something and you are using it, right? So basically whatever, for example, let's assume an example of milk, right? The milk that was produced was then sent to different parts of the country and it was bought by someone like you and me in order to consume it. So that is what we mean as consumption, right? So consumption means it's with respect to us as consumers, to use. Not just to buy, but it is to use, right? Usage is the correct word here. Yes? So again, some more examples that I can give you. Yes? Now, of course, when you talk about bees, right? We know that from bees we get honey. Or we know that from silkworms we get silk. But my question to you is, if bees give us honey and silkworms give us silk, do we just, buy silkworms and do we just buy bees so that I will get my honey and, silk in any manner? Is that possible? Yes or no, right? We don't get it like that. No, nobody buys silkworms. But rather, what do we buy, right? Or what do we end up getting? We end up getting honey in either packaged bottles, or when you talk about silkworm, we know that from the silkworm, it is processed, right? We've learned about it in our science subjects about how silk is processed, yes? So we understand that there is some processing which is involved, right? Or rather, what I would say is that there is some production which is involved, right? So that is what at a broad aspect we are going to be learning about today. So in this mind map, there are 5 things that we are going to cover. We're going to learn about what is production. We are then going to learn about how we produce. Then we will also learn about why do we produce and how do we do it again, just to add on. Then who all are involved in this process of production and how can we become a little more labor friendly, right? And this whole chapter that is there, the story of village Palampur, deals with the ideology, right? So with the help of this hypothetical village, we see that we're able to learn a lot of these concepts with examples. Because if you learn about it theoretically, there is no point, right? See, everything, especially with respect to economics, if you are just going to blindly memorize the theory of it, there is no use. Here, there will be a lot of real life situations, a lot of real life examples that you can apply that will definitely help you out, right? So first and foremost, if we have to get started with understanding what is production and how we do it, we should have a basic idea of what is production, right? So when you hear the word production, now production is not an English word that is very new to you, right? You've heard the word production. So take a minute right now and try to think to yourself, what does the word production even mean? Yes, you learn. Plants produce their own food, right? Or we see that this factory produces things in a large scale, right? So can you all tell me, yes, what does the word production mean? To produce. See, to produce, okay, producing something, making something, okay, creating something. I wanted to use an alternative word of produce. I don't want you to tell me, arey ma'am, production means to produce something. So what is another word? To make or to manufacture. Very good. Yes, what are the words? Yes, exactly. Manufacturing, to create. Okay, more or less you've got the idea, right? To provide, fine. Okay, very good, very good. Always think of it. Ask yourself the questions that I ask you in class, right? So now, of course, when we talk about production, or what does the word production even mean? Production is nothing but the activity of combining, right? To produce something or to create something or to manufacture something. But it's not as simple as that, right? So as we all know, it refers to the activity of combining material inputs. Very fancy word, right? So what are material inputs? They are nothing but they could include your raw materials, right? So raw materials that I require. Now imagine that I have my own manufacturing company, right? I want to have a garment industry and I want to make t-shirts because I enjoy making t-shirts. So what would my raw material be? It would be the cotton that I would require, right? Or the cotton threads or the yarn that I would require in order to make my shirts. So basically the raw materials or whatever things I would, or whatever products I would require for manufacturing my, product at the end of it is what you understand as material input, right? Input means what is it that you are going to give. Output means what will I get back in turn, right? So that is the understanding of input and output. And here we're talking about to produce a product or an output. Simple. So we know what is production. Are we all clear? I am going very slow with this chapter, not because you know that I want to teach you slowly. It's just that if you are watching this, I would recommend that you understand things clearly, right? See, in most cases, I will establish for a lot of students who are here right now. Now, as per rationalized syllabus, this particular chapter will not come in your final exam, but it is going to be there for your periodic test, which is why this chapter is very important for all of you, because in your upcoming internal assessments, you will get this chapter. Yes? Is water a raw material? It could be, right? So if you think about a hydroelectric plant, right? Water is necessary for generating electricity. So you could consider that as one among the material inputs that is there. Yes? So now, with this ideology of production, right? Let's have a look at this particular part. Now see, there was one way in which I could directly tell you all the important concepts, right? But we also need to understand the important pointers that are there from this particular chapter. So the introduction starts with talking about a description of Palampur, right? Now in this particular case, students, I want all of you, right? And I need all of you to highlight these points, right? They talk about how Palampur is well connected with the neighboring villages and towns, right? And we see that they have weathered roads that connects them, and we see that it connects them to a small town which is Shahpur, right? And we also see that there are various kinds of transport which is visible on the road, and you can list all of these down. Now, along with this, what I need you to highlight, please highlight with me because I'll tell you what kind of questions you can get. Now, we know that there are about 450 families that live in Palampur, which all belong to different castes. And of course, we know that there are 80 upper castes and a majority of them own land there. And we also see that the houses are made of brick and some cement plastering. While on the other cases, there are some families wherein we see that they have smaller houses which are made of mud and straw. And now we see that they have electric connections which, provides power to tube wells and small businesses. And we also see that there are primary schools where there are 2 of them and 1 high school. We see that there is a primary healthcare center, and we also see that there is a dispensary which is run by the government. Now, the pointers that I have highlighted are very important. I'll tell you why. Because you can get a good 5-mark question from this particular part. Just on this particular part, you can get a good 5-mark question where they can ask you, right? State any 5 reasons, okay? State any 5 reasons as to why Palampur can be considered as a developed village, right? Or a developing village. So in this particular case, right, if they ask you this question, you need to write. See, now from here you get 5 points, right? And here they have mentioned it as well in this. The description above shows that Palampur is a fairly well-developed village which has good system of roads, it has transport, electricity, and you need to mention this, right? So as we all know, this right here is going to be important because this looks like something we like skipping. Arey ma'am, this is story, why should I write about this? This is not going to be important, right? So that's why we tend to skip this part. So as and when I take this chapter, I'm also going to be telling you all the important questions that they will ask you from this particular topic, right? So now we have a good idea of what are all the facilities that are available in Palampur. Yes? So here this could be a long answer question that you can get. So now let's understand a little bit more, right? Let's understand a little bit more about how does production happen, right? So now we know that production is basically there is some material input and we are able to produce or manufacture something or get an output. So how are we able to do it, right? So if the aim of production is to get goods and services that we want, then there will be some requirements, right? So as we all know, there are going to be certain requirements that we need for production. It is not that, without this is, it's not going to be that, oh, raw material is there and finally I'm going to get output. There are certain conditions that we need to keep in mind, right? So when it comes to the factors, right, or the things which are necessary for production, we call them as factors of production, right? So what are all the factors that are necessary for production? So we know that one factor is land, second factor is labor, third factor is capital, and the last factor is entrepreneurship. So let's start with the first one, which is land. And let's do this with an example, okay? Now with my students, I'm sure some of you from my 8th grade class who've watched my session on manufacturing industries have come, right? The chapter industries, you have come to 9th standard and you are watching my class. Now much later with my previous batch of students, I had decided to open up a factory. How many of you remember what my factory was going to be called? How many of my regular students? Yes, exactly. It was called Ganga Industries. Due to lack of creativity, I came up with the name Ganga Industries, right? Now, what was Ganga Industries doing? Ganga Industries here was manufacturing clothes, right? And I wanted to manufacture t-shirts because that's what I enjoy. Now, if I want to have Ganga Industries or Ganga Garments or whatever it is going to be, now what is it that I need to do? I need to have a factory, right? Let's assume I want to have a factory. Now, if I want to have a factory, whether it is to build a factory or whether I want to do farming or whether I want to, maybe open up a shop, right? Or maybe I want to open up a school or whether I want to open up anything as a matter of fact, what would I require? Here, I would require land. right? So land becomes the first requirement in this particular case. Yes, so we know that along with land we also require other natural resources, right? We know that access to water, access to certain raw materials that are there, these are all necessary. So land becomes the first requirement. And of course, in this particular chapter, we're going to explain more and more about how land is necessary. Now, the next thing that we require, right, is labor. Now, what do we mean by labor? Now, can you tell me what is it that you understand by the word labor? Or we know that there is a laborer who is helping me build my house. Or there is a laborer who's going to help me with running my factory, right? So, who are laborers? Try to understand it quite literally, right? Because words are not new to us. Exactly, somebody who is helping us, somebody who's doing the work for us, okay, somebody who's helping us, somebody who does the task, a skilled worker, very good, right? So basically laborers are people who will do the work, yes? So who are they? People who will do the work. Now understand that when it comes to this work, right? Work here could be skilled work, yes? Now for example, if you have to teach biology or if I have to teach economics, I need to be skilled enough to teach you economics or biology, right? But at the same time, if I have to be a construction worker, right? Or let's say that I want to maybe I'm ready to do some day-to-day jobs, right? So at this particular point, in that case, does my degree matter? At this point, I need to be able to do the job, right? So there are some jobs which could or involve unskilled work as well, right? So we know that there are people who are necessary to do manual work. There are people who are necessary to do skilled work also, right? So both in this case, we know that there are some work which is skilled. There is some work which can be categorized as unskilled also, right? To all my students who are very new, I welcome you to the class. I welcome you, but now all of you need to pay attention. I have not at all told you what is an entrepreneur, so you hold on that because I have just reached point number 2, which is understanding how land and how labor plays or are important factors, right? So I am still in the second point. Now the third point that I'd like to stress upon is capital, right? So when you understand by the word capital, what is it that you understand? Don't tell me, ma'am, capital means it is a city which is the capital of the state. But economics mein, what do we mean by the word capital? There's an image that is supporting you and helping you. Yes, you can take a screenshot, no problem, I'll be towards the side. Money, okay, finance. First thing, right? First thing that we know whenever we talk about capital, paisa, right? Every time it is equal to money. But understand that capital at all times is not only money, right? See, when I talk about capital, I'm just going to remove this particular part. Capital is basically, it's a broad term, right? It's a very broad umbrella term which talks about how it could be anything that will give the person a value or an advantage, right? So how can I say capital could basically be a broad term which gives me as an owner some advantage or maybe some value, right? So which is why we see that we have two types of capital. Yes? So what are the two types of capital? Let's understand it better. But before we go into that, we need to understand this term which is physical capital, right? So when we talk about physical capital, we see that it refers, yes, to the variety of inputs required at every stage of production. Students, if you have your textbooks, please put a star mark, right? Please put a star mark because this is also a very commonly asked question. So physical capital refers to the variety, the different types of input that goes into production. Now, what are the two kinds? You have fixed capital and working capital, right? So when we talk about fixed capital, we see that fixed capital is a type of physical input that remains for a long period of time, right? So for example, if I want to start a shop, right, or if I want to start a factory, I will require some machines and tools. Does that mean that every month on month I will buy new machines and I'll keep throwing my old machine? No, it is a one-time investment that is there, right? But at the same time, when you know working capital that comes, right? Fixed means one time and it stays for a long period of time. Working means we know that this includes your raw materials, it includes your money, which is utilized, right? So whether it's your raw materials, you will use it and then you need more raw materials. Now same thing with money. You will spend that money on maybe buying raw materials or maybe paying your workers, and then of course you need to raise more money, right? Which is why here we see that working capital is including your raw materials and money. So so in this case we see that this is a broad difference between the two. But along with this, there is a third type of capital as well. Can any of you tell me what would be the third kind of capital that brings your fixed and your working capital together? Yes, exactly, Papia. Exactly. Yes, what would be the third kind of category? Exactly. Very good, students. Very good. Who brings your fixed capital like your buildings and your machines and your raw materials together? It is your humans, right? So we see that we call this as a human capital. Now, of course, I'm not going to get into this aspect of it because we learn more about it in the second chapter. So this is something we are going to leave a little untouched at this point, right? But understand that human capital that is there is also necessary to bring these two together. Yes? Okay. All right, everybody. All right. Now, one very important question that you need to write is they can ask you, explain physical capital and its types, right? So here if you get it, you can get this for 3 marks, right? So students, everybody, this right here is going to be very, very important. This is the second most important question that can come from this particular topic, right? Okay. Yes, Nilakshi, I know that might not be there, but you can check the money and credit session which is there on the channel. That will help you out, right? Yes. Ma'am, in my textbook, human capital is a separate factor. It is a separate factor and we will learn more about it. It's basically how humans are used as human resources, right? Yes. Are we all clear so far? Are you all with me? Mentee is not there. Okay? Are we all clear? Give me a quick thumbs up so that we can move on to the last part, right? See, now, as we all know, right? As we all know, when you think about it, you have land, you have your workers, you have money, right? But if it has to be successful, you need to have an idea of how to develop and organize a business, right? And that's what we call as entrepreneurship. Who is an entrepreneur? An entrepreneur or a businessman rather, because I'm not very good with the business terminologies of it. But an entrepreneur is somebody who has the ability to envision a business. For example, right? Let's think about the times when, let's think about it in maybe, let me give you an easy example that you're able to understand. Okay. So let's think about during COVID time, right? So during COVID time, what happened? You were not able to go to schools, right? And then of course, you know that when you were not able to go to schools, you had to have a different mode of learning and teaching, right? Which is why in your schools also, if you see, there were softwares which were developed, right? Softwares which were developed by which you were able to, attend school online. Yes. So we see that at that point, the problem was students were not able to physically be present in school. So what do we do to help them out, right? So you had, yes, you had us, you had, your softwares like Meet and many other, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time for, but a lot of apps were developed, right? And see, eventually at one point, what is happening? You are not only able to, so let me give the example there, right? So here you are able to solve problems and you are able to make sure that it helps many people, right? So that is a goal and a vision of an entrepreneur. Same way when you think about it in a very easy manner. Like let's think about the time when maybe a phone was invented, right? When you had a mobile phone. We know that many people out there, we knew that they were using landlines, but there were a lot of problems in the sense that people felt like, hey, how about we make people's life better and we give them a compact phone which they can carry around everywhere. So then what did they do? They made that into a there was a problem, right? Or a problem statement, I would say. Not problem need not always be negative, like, oh, things are going bad and I need to solve. It could also be that, hey, we have this, how about I make this better than what it is already, right? It is not always that something is going bad. It could also be, how can I just make something existing even better, right? So when you talk about an entrepreneur or an entrepreneurship, it's the ability to make it into a business. Tomorrow, if Ganga Garments has to be successful, I should be able to make sure that all the t-shirts made by Ganga Garments goes to different parts of the country. Many people buy it so that I can produce more and more, right? Yes. Yeah. Hey, landline was only there. I had a phone when I was like in college, I think. Till then, I didn't have a phone. Or maybe, yeah, I had like, I think when I was in 11th or 12th. Yes. Anyway, right? Yes, I know. I was trying to advertise my own Ganga Industries brand, right? So now, of course, everybody, this is just an added pointer. This is just an added pointer for all of you, right? So this was the intent. Now, of course, before I go ahead with it, I have a quick question for all of you, right? Money is a fixed capital. True or false? Abhinav, you give me the answer to this. Yes. Ma'am, is working capital a physical capital? Yes, it is a type of physical capital. What are physical capitals? It's nothing but the inputs that you put into it so that you get output, right? Everybody's telling me, ma'am, it is false. If it is false, why? Is it a fixed capital? If it is not a fixed capital, then what is it? Waiting for your answer. If it is not a fixed capital, then what is money, right? Exactly, money here is not a fixed capital, but rather it is a working capital. So now we have understood about all the 4 factors of production, right? Now this right here is also going to be very important because they can ask you a question. So whatever we've discussed so far, you can get another question which says, state any 4 requirements necessary for production of goods, right? So I'm just writing, I have the questions written on my tab here, but I also make it a little easy so that I've just written it down. But this right here could easily come for 4 marks, right? So you will have to elaborate on land, you will have to elaborate on labor, and in capital, you will have to mention physical capital ka 2 types, right? Yes, you will have to mention it in great detail. So are you all clear with it? Are you all clear? Because now we're going to elaborate a little bit more, right? We're going to elaborate a little bit more on each of this, right? So now we learned about a broad overview, but let's understand each of these 3 in great detail so that we can go into a little bit more about the how we produce, but also about the why we produce, right? So now, of course, when you talk about production, right? Now let me go back and ask you this question. Now, why are we talking about producing these goods and services? Why is it that we need to think about producing clothes? Or why is it that we need to think about building houses? Or why is it that we need to think about, producing food and cultivating food, right? So why is it that I have to do all of this? Yes, can you tell me, why are we talking about it? To lead a good life, right? Or to fulfill our needs. Yes, very good. It's necessity for survival. Exactly. Not to protest, but to protect, right? See, one thing you need to understand is that way back when we were not, before when we had the kind of life that we did, early man in itself, right, did do a little bit of production by himself. For example, in order to protect himself, you know that he got all the raw materials. He bought wood, he bought stone, he made weapons so that he could, protect himself, and he could go and hunt food and he could bring it. Along with that, whenever he needed to make sure that he has food, he will secure the food and he will keep it, right? So he was thereby what do you see? Over a period of time, we see that he was able to protect himself and he was able to survive. But we also know that after one point, when early man, who was a nomad, right? That means he went from one place to another in search of food and shelter. But when he decided to settle down, right? Which means that when he decided to settle down, what did he start practicing? Can you tell me? What is it that he started to practice? Because when he settled down, it brought the advent of dash, right? What did it bring? Can you tell me? Exactly. Very good, Harsimran, Pragati, all of you, Papya. Exactly. It brought into agriculture, right? And see, agriculture is not again something that is very new to us, right? From our lower grades, we've been learning about agriculture. So what is agriculture? It is a branch of science that deals with cultivating crops at a large scale along with livestock to again fulfill our needs or to fulfill the commercial needs, right? So we see that in the case of our village, right? So we'll go back to our story. In the case of our village, Palampur, we see that mainly we observe that there are farming activities which are in place and there are some non-farming activities also, right? So in this case, if you observe, let me go back to your textbook, and if you have your textbook, you can highlight this part. We see that in the case of, in our village Palampur, 75% of the people here are dependent on farming for their livelihood, right? And we also see that many of the people who are there and many of the villagers who are there, we see that these farmers could be farmers or they could be farm laborers also. Now understand that although we see that there is farming or majority of people are dependent on farming, we also see that there is some constraint in raising the farm production. Okay, so I'm going to stop at this point and we're going to understand a little more. Dhruv Bacha, what is your problem? You tell me and pay attention in class, right? Otherwise, you don't pay attention in class and you can leave. I'm not forcing you to stay. But I need your attention here if you are here. So first and foremost, we see that 75% that is there, right? So we know that 75% of the population who are here are dependent on farming. And we call such a society as an agrarian society. Yes? What do we mean by an agrarian society? We see that an agrarian society is a society whose economy, right? We see that it's an economy who is dependent on agriculture. Now, when you think about our country also, we know that majority of our population is also still dependent on agriculture, right? Exactly. So, Palampur is also an example of an agrarian society where 75% of the population is dependent on agriculture. Now, we saw that in Palampur's case, we see that there is some constraint in raising farm production. Now, what do we mean by this, right? So, in this particular case, we see that in Palampur, the area, the land that is there is fixed, right? It is not that there is going to be extra land that is there. So we see that land under area or land area under cultivation is practically fixed. And since 1960, this has been the case where there's been no expansion in the case of land under area of cultivation. Constraint means restriction, right? There is some boundary, there is a restriction. Which means that if this is my area of Palampur, yes, and they say that 60% of this area or let's say 50% of the area in this village has been dedicated for your agriculture, right? Now this 50% is not going to change. Okay, 50% is fixed. Yes, are we all clear? Then of course we see that over a period of time within the area, what did the people do? Maybe some, wasteland areas or maybe some unculturable areas, they kind of converted it, right? So they kind of converted it in that manner. So now, of course, as we all know, we see that there exists no scope of increasing farm production by bringing new land. Okay, so even though they tried to do all of that, there was no scope to bring in new land. Okay, now see students, I can see that a lot of you here are getting distracted and I don't know why. In case if you want to watch it later, you watch it later. But if you're in live class, you pay attention. That's all that I'm asking you. Okay? Ma'am, fixed land means every person has some hectares of land and they can't increase it. See, fixed land, yes and no, right? So fixed land means that they have some amount of land that is allocated to them, and there could be cases where if say for example if I want to go and buy some land also, I can do that. But basically in an area of the whole village, that percentage of land that gets dedicated is more or less fixed, right? Yes. मैम विलेज में कौन कौन लेबरर्स होते हैं मैं बताती हूँ नजीम. Let me just get to that part, right? As simple as that. So now, of course, as we all know, this is what we understand by it. That means that your land that you want to do agriculture in is more or less fixed. So what can I do? Now, demand, of course, over a period of time, we know that demand in agriculture has increased, right? We know that there has been an increasing demand. So is there any way in which I can grow more crops with the same amount of land, right? We always think that more crops is equal to more land, right? More crops is equal to more land. Now they are asking us, is there any possibility that I can do more crops but with the same amount of land? Yes or no? Now this is a very important point. Green revolution, everybody is telling me. But there are various traditional ways or simpler ways in which earlier they were trying to achieve it, right? So that is where we see that there are certain techniques which are incorporated into it, such as multiple cropping, development of electricity and irrigation systems that are there. So let's get started with understanding about cropping system. So when we talk about agriculture, we need to go back into cropping. So here, if you all understand and if you've been very regular in my class, you know that cropping system is something that I have taught you quite a little bit in detail, right? So now, of course, at this particular aspect, right? So when we talk about cropping system, in village of Palampur, we see that they don't leave land idle, right? So I can say that no land is left idle. That means that if there is a piece of agricultural land, okay, everyone, are you all able to see me? Everything is good? Okay, sorry students, there was a slight glitch in my end. Yes, thank you. So as we all know, when we talk about farming, okay, thank you so much. When we talk about farming, right, we know that in the case of Palampur, we know that they don't leave any land idle, right? That means that they utilize their land well. So in this particular case, what happens? We know that there are different cropping seasons. We know that there is Kharif cropping season and Rabi cropping season. Now we already know about Kharif and Rabi. Now what do we mean by Kharif crops? Kharif crops are those crops which are sown during the rainy season, right? And we know that they are harvested around October, November time, while Rabi, which is why we often call them as your monsoon crops or your, monsoon crops that are there. Now your Rabi crops that are there are normally your winter crops, which are sown during the winter season, right? So when in the case or in the village of Palampur, what they do is normally during Kharif season, they grow bajra and jowar, right? And we see that these particular plants are used as cattle feed, okay? Which means that these are food for the cattle. But along with that, we see that along the lines of the Rabi season, they grow wheat and they grow potatoes also. Now along with that, we see that whatever they manufacture, right, especially in the case of wheat, whatever is surplus. Now what is surplus? Surplus is nothing but whatever is extra, right? Whatever is extra, they will sell it to the small towns that are there nearby. Now along with this, we also see that sugar cane is also grown once in a while and it is sold to traders also. So we also see that sugar cane is normally done. So what they do, we see that now 1 or 2 crops are grown in one particular season. But along with the same time, in order to increase their production, right, they are also resorting towards multiple cropping. Now what do we understand as multiple cropping? Multiple cropping is one way of increasing the production where they grow 2 main crops, right? So we see that when they grow 2 or more main crops, 2 main crops on the same piece of land, along with maybe growing potatoes or whatever, we call this as multiple croppings, right? So we see that multiple cropping is one aspect where they utilize the land better. Yes? So this is one aspect of it. But now if they want to do multiple cropping, there are various other conditions that need to do, right? Or various other conditions that they need to satisfy. So for this, I'm going to go back a little bit to your textbook, right? So how is it that if they want to achieve multiple cropping and they are successful in achieving multiple cropping, how are they able to do it? 2 very important pointers here. Yes? So first and foremost, we see that they have a well-developed irrigation system. Please highlight this point in your textbook. And along with that, we see that electricity came early to the city, to the village of Palampur. So electricity and irrigation are very, very important, right? Now, how is this important? From this only we can understand, right? We know that when electricity is there, we know that it also has the ability to install systems of irrigation. And we know that earlier, of course, there were Persian wheels and various traditional tools that were used. But now, of course, when we use irrigation methods, we know that water from wells and everything can be extracted in order to irrigate. And we also see that electric run tube wells can also be there. That means that now if there are crops which are either dependent, so maybe even in a non-kharif season, I am able to grow a kharif crop, right? Because in kharif season, the water requirement is very high, but I'm still able to fulfill it because of how much water I'm able to give, right? So now, of course, in this particular case, right, what do we understand? Development of electricity plays a very important role because it supplies power for all tube wells, and along with that, development of well irrigated systems is important. Now, why was it such a huge attraction, or why are we focusing so much on this irrigation system? Can any of you tell me why is it that we are focusing on irrigation systems? Because in our assumption, every part of our country should have irrigated systems, right, or irrigation systems. Is that the case? Does every part of our country have well-developed irrigation system? Yes or no is what I want you to answer. Water is important. Okay. Yes. Yes. Ranjit, can we have a look at the chat, please? I think we need to keep an eye. Yes, no, yes, no. Okay. Many of you are focusing at no, right? See, understand that across different villages, right, we see that there are different levels of irrigation. Now, first and foremost, we know that there are some, villages which are close by to rivers, there are fertile soils, so on and so forth. But there are some villages where access to water is also very difficult, right? Which is why we see that irrigation systems play a very important role, because it also helps in improving the productivity, or it also helps in getting good amount of crops, right? So with this, what do we understand? We understand that there are various techniques which can be employed. But again, if you see, all of this, right, moves a little bit along the lines of traditional techniques. Now, when you talk about traditional techniques, I'm not even talking irrigation system. Now, think about the crop production and management chapter. When we learnt about traditional tools, right? So when we learnt about traditional tools, whether it was for plowing of soil, preparation of soil, or whether it's for sowing of seeds, or whether it's for irrigation, what was one of the biggest disadvantage of traditional methods? Can you tell me? What are some of the biggest disadvantage of traditional methods? Yes? So we know that in the case of traditional methods, we know that they are heavily, yes? So we know that they are heavily dependent on manual labor, right? So we know that they were heavily dependent on manual labor. We know that in the case of irrigation, there was a lot of wastage of water. Exactly. So we know that there was wastage of water, right? And we know that it was pretty time-taking. Exactly. It was time-taking. But more than that, can you say that there was high productivity, right? Can I say that there was high productivity, or should I say there was less productivity? Yes? High productivity or low productivity? Exactly. Very good, Asta. There was low production, right? So less production was happening in this particular case. Or rather, I would say that there was low yield. Okay? Important word coming in. Low yield. Which is why we saw that post 1950s, 1960s, there was a transformation towards modern methods of farming, right? So we saw that there was a transition into modern methods of farming for higher yield. Yes? Now, before I tell you about what are the modern methods and everything, we need to have an understanding of what do we mean by the word yield, right? So what does the word yield mean? Now, yield refers to the quantity of production in 1 hectare of land. Or simply, if I have 1 hectare of land, right, how many crops am I able to produce? Am I getting good number of healthy crops? That means I have good yield. But if I'm getting less number of healthy crops and some of them died or some of them didn't even germinate, some of them, are unhealthy and unusable, then we mean by the fact that it is low yield, right? So it's as simple as high yield and low yield. Now this of course signifies how much production can be made from one unit of land or one piece of land, right? So of course, like I said, up until 1960s, lot of traditional tools were there. Less irrigation, they were using natural fertilizers like your manure. They were also using traditional methods of irrigation. Lot of inputs were there, right? Lot of manual labor. But something happened around the 1960s, right? So what happened around the time of 1960s, which you all have been asking me from that time? Yes? What happened around that time? Exactly. Very good, Rajesh. Very good. Yes. Green Revolution happened, right? So what is this Green Revolution that happened around the late 1960s that kind of transformed the life of farmers? So what happened around this time? Modern methods came into the picture and the way we started approaching farming changed quite a bit, right? So we see that Green Revolution refers to the set of technological advancement. So now no longer are we no longer are we just focusing on the manual aspects of it. We're incorporating technology that is there, right? And we see that the technological advancements that were made in agriculture such that we were able to increase production by introducing things as HYV seeds, fertilizers, and of course modern machinery like your threshers and tractors, right? So when of course we learned in our previous chapter in grade 8 science, when we learned crop production and management, we saw that for every step that we do in agriculture, there was a traditional way of doing it and there were modern tools which were implemented, right? So which is why in this particular case we see that this is what we understand as Green Revolution. So everybody, you can take a quick screenshot if you want to. And Ranjit, can we please turn that on? Thank you. Yes, everybody, you can take a quick screenshot. Are you done? Shall I come back? Okay. Okay. So now everybody's quick question is, ma'am, what are these HYV seeds, right? HYV here stands for high yielding seed, variety seeds, right? So we see that these are high yielding variety seeds, okay? Now we saw that these were not seeds that you traditionally get from the plant, but rather these were things that were technologically developed and that provided more yield, right? So here in this particular case, we were getting them from nurseries and laboratories from where we saw that due to a lot of processes that were implemented, these seeds guaranteed that they would give us high yield, right? Which is why we call them as high yielding variety seeds. Now, of course, this high yielding variety seeds came at a price, right? Now, what did it come with? What is this price that it came? So first and foremost, in order to cultivate or to grow these high yielding variety, they required a lot of nutrients, right? Which is why we saw that there were a lot of chemical fertilizers which were manufactured in order to enhance the soil health. Now, along with that, we also saw that this attracted a lot of pests or unwanted insects, which is why pesticides were also utilized. And of course, they needed large amount of water, which is why we saw that there were high irrigation facilities which were developed in order to provide regular water supply and adequate water supply, right? Ma'am, how does excessive use of tube well cause over irrigation? See, the word excessive and over in itself go hand in hand, right? So we see that from the tube well, what happens? We know that that's something I'm also going to get to, but we see that it depletes the groundwater, right? So we know that this was something which was necessary. And as we all know, we got high yield out of it. And especially states like Haryana, Western Uttar Pradesh, they were the first among the states to implement high yielding varieties. And we also saw that there was a peak in how much wheat that was manufactured, right? So in this particular case, if you look at Palampur also, we saw that the yield of wheat was pretty high. So earlier from traditional varieties, so in your textbook you can highlight this point, from traditional varieties they got about 1300 kgs per hectare of land, right? But with high yielding varieties, we saw that they got about 3200, almost double the amount from per hectare of land, right? So now we saw that with this particular case, they built a large surplus. That means there was a lot of extra that they were, manufacturing, and there was a lot of extra that they were producing. Which means that with all this extra, they could sell and they could make money in the market, right? So this right here are the ways in which modern farming methods were implemented. But of course, like I said, it came with a price. Right? So there was an impact of green revolution on the environment because we are using chemical pesticides, chemical fertilizers, and we are over irrigating, which means the usage of all these chemicals started having an impact on the soil health, right? Because soil has natural microbes, soil also produces its own nutrients by the process of decomposition, and if you add chemicals to it, it of course affects the chemical nature, right, or the chemical balance, and all those microorganisms will not be able to survive. Now somebody was asking me, ma'am, how is it that over usage of tube well will cause over irrigation? See, you understand that when you say that I am irrigating the land, where am I getting this water from? Water is coming from the ground level only, right? Or from the ground water that is there, or your water table. Now, the more and more you keep pumping it to irrigate, we see that the more and more water gets depleted. So again, like I said, the usage is much, much higher than how much is available. And see, with water, we always get confused with one aspect. Ma'am, 70% of the earth is filled with water. Still, you are telling me that we are struggling with water shortage, right? And this is a very important topic that we will cover in 10th standard under water resource, and we'll understand water scarcity. Now, here we are talking about the usable water that is there, right? So, usable water is getting depleted over a period of time, which is why we need to have smart irrigation systems, right? So, I think Rajesh was telling me, ma'am, even when you're implementing irrigation, we should have smart irrigation system. So, can you tell me one such irrigation system that we have already learnt about in our lower grades? Can you tell me? 8th grade may we learnt about an irrigation system which conserves a lot of water, right? Exactly, it is drip irrigation. Yes? Very good. So drip irrigation ideally is what is going to be necessary. More than your sprinkler, I would recommend, it is recommended to have drip irrigation. So now, of course, students, very quickly, just give me 1 minute. I will tell you some important questions that will come from this particular topic, right? So from this topic, of course, they will ask you the importance of irrigation facilities, right? Why is it that irrigation facilities are necessary for increasing production? And they will also talk about the importance of, green revolution. They'll ask you to write down at least a short note on green revolution, and they'll ask you the demerits of green revolution. Yes? So very quickly before I go ahead, right? Are we all clear? Differentiate between merit means advantage. Demerit means disadvantage. Simple as that. Okay? Yes. Any doubts, right? Any doubts so far? I hope there are relevant doubts. Ma'am, harmful effects of green revolution. Yes, that can also be a question, right? Ma'am, can you write it down? Okay. I have it with me on the tab here. Why is it necessary to raise irrigation facilities, or why is it important to have irrigation facilities? Then they'll ask you write a short note on the importance, or they can say relevance of green revolution. Third one could be, what are the demerits of green revolution? They can ask you what are the negative effects of green revolution, negative impacts, so on and so forth. Ma'am, what is fixed capital? Fixed capital is basically the capital, right, or the input that you are putting that will be there for a long period of time. Like your tools and all of that is an example of fixed capital. Definition for green revolution, it is basically all the technological reforms that are implemented into agriculture for high yield, right? It's as simple as that. Yes, not SS, MS I think. MS Swaminathan started green revolution. What are factors for production? Land. We learned about how land is necessary. We learned about how labor is necessary. Capital and types of capital, right? We learned about it. Ma'am, okay, 1 minute. Some questions are going beyond what I'm able to see. So let me just open it in my phone. Drip irrigation, array, we learned it in 8th grade, right? So we have nozzles that will put the nozzles or small, pointy, nozzles that are there which will drop it drip by drip near the root tips. Okay. Ma'am, can you write green? I will show you. See, Geeta, rewind it back. Green revolution definition is there, right? Okay. Krishnalal, ask me relevant questions. Okay. Ma'am, green revolution in short terms, I have explained it already. Do we need to learn production chart? No, that's just for my reference that I am teaching you, right? Okay. Shall we move on? Shall we all move on, right? So now, of course, as we all know, disadvantage of green revolution, as we all know, I have written it right here, right? Disadvantage of green revolution. Ma'am, question, क्या कल वाली class की तरह नहीं आ सकती video में? हाँ, I will do that particular class as well. Don't worry. See, this is just a teaching class, but I'll also be taking Super 30 class for this particular chapter as well. A lot of questions are there which will definitely help you out, right? Shall we all move on to the next aspect of it? Yes? Where we're going to talk about who all are involved in production, right? Now, before I go ahead with this, how about we take a 1-minute water break? Right? Shall we take a 1-minute water break where we'll stretch our arms and legs, we'll move our hands, right? Little exercise we will do so that we're able to, refresh a little bit, right? So I'm just going to give you a small water break. Yes, quick water break for me also. Because 1 hour we've been studying continuously. But my intent is that if you're sitting 1 hour in my class, I want to make sure that you feel confident about this chapter, right? So feel confident about this chapter and then we shall move ahead, okay? So now at this point, I'm going to give you 2 minutes water break and then I'm going to be back, okay? All right, everybody, we are back. Yes, we are back from our break, right? Yes. Okay. Are we ready? Shall we move on to the last part? What is everybody doing? Nobody is going to pay attention to that right now. Okay. Now we're back. I need all of you to not digress and go having random conversations. Let's just give you a quick break, right? So that I could also drink some water because I was also feeling very thirsty. Are we ready? Josh is back because we're left to the last parts of it, okay? The last parts of it is actually quite interesting part which is left, where we're going to discuss a little bit about who all are involved in this production, how is all this money getting distributed, how are they involved. Now let me tell you one aspect about it. Now the portion that I'm going to teach you right now Trust me, you will learn this particular portion as two different chapters in your 10th standard, right? So this is something you need to pay close attention to so that you get a basic idea. 10th May, you will learn more about it when we do sectors of Indian economy, when I talk to you about money and credit. You'll learn about a lot of interesting things like that, right? So I need all of you to pay attention to the next aspect of it. I will try my best, Chaitanya. I think Monday, Tuesday, Ankita ma'am will come, okay? But till then, please kindly don't spam in the live chat. So now, of course, we've learned a little bit about land, and now we've understood how we can utilize the land and what all different ways in which we can do it, right? But now, of course, when we talk about land distribution, yes, so now we've only spoken about how to utilize the land. But here we're also going to be talking a little bit more about land distribution. So here I'm going to go into this very aspect, and I have two slides from your textbook. We're talking about land distribution in Palampur, right? So when you talk about land distribution, we know that ideally when we think about land distribution, we think that it's all very equal, right? Land is distributed equally amongst all farmers. Absolutely not, right? So as we all know, when we talk about land distribution, it is kind of an we know that it is not indiscriminate, but unequal distribution, right? Or inequitable distribution that is there. So in Palampur, what do we see? And this is again a question they will ask you. If it is blur, please increase the brightness in your screen, right? So we know that in this particular case, we know that in Palampur, about 1/3 of the 450 families are landless. Think about it. 1/3 of the 450 families, that means 150 families are landless. That means that they have no land for cultivation. While we see that the remaining families that are there. So let's write this down in easy words. We don't need fancy word for us, right? So we have a total of 450 families in Palampur. Yes? Now in this, what do we see? When we say no land, around 150 families do not have or they do not own any land, right? Now at the same time, when you talk about small plots, right? So that means that they're not very big, less than 2 hectares of land. We see that only about, we see that about 240 of them have small plots, right? And along with that, let me move on to another part. We see that, where's my highlighter? Yes. In Palampur, there are 60 families of medium and large farmers who cultivate more than 2 hectares of land, and even a smaller percentage that have bigger lands as well. So what do we understand at this point, right? Write it down in this manner. See, instead of just blindly reading it out there, you can write it down point-wise on the side. So from this, what do you understand? We understand that when it comes to cultivated area, right, we see that around more than 55% of the area, if you have total 100% as land under agriculture, more than 55% comes under medium, semi-medium and large farmers. That means their area of land is greater than 2 hectares. But when you look at marginal and small farmers, they own only 44% or 44.6% of the land. But what is it that I want you to focus on? Look at the number of farmers. We see that majority farmers in Palampur, almost 85%, belong to your marginal sector, while less than 15% or less will belong to medium, semi-medium and large, right? So now, of course, let's understand this bifurcation a little more clearly. Your marginal farmers, first of all, are people who have less than 1 hectare of land. Small farmers, less than 2 hectares or 1 to 2 hectares of land. Then what about semi-medium? It is about 2 to 4 hectares of land. What are medium? 4 to 10 hectares of land. Then you have large farmers who have huge pieces of land. So let me go back to this, right? Because this particular chart is very, very important, okay? Now, my question to all of you, right? Let's assume this is 100%. This is all the land you can do agriculture in, right? This is all the land you can do agriculture in. But in this particular case, what do you observe? We see that almost 55%, okay, this is 55 point something 4%, I guess, which is belonging to your semi-medium, medium and large farmers, right? That means that people who own more than, right, or let's say more than 2 to 4 hectares of land, right? That means they own large areas of land. Yes, we see that they constitute this 55.4. But if you look at how many people come in that category of owning that much land, it's only 15%. That means that in 100 people, only 15 people, think about it. You have 100 people, 15 people alone own more than 55% of the land. That means 55 acres of land in 100 acres is owned just by 15 people. While remaining whatever 44.6 or hectares of land, I'm converting it into easy one, right? Over 85 people own this small percentage. Are you getting this? Are you able to understand this part? That 15 people own large areas, while more than 85 people are owning a smaller percentage. That means in this category of people, right, will they have big plots of land? No. But rather what will happen? All of them will own small and smaller pieces of land. And over a period of time, right? Over a period of time, what will happen? Imagine this is a guy called Govind, right? He owned this piece of land. He has 2 children. So what will happen after his death? This one single piece of land that was there, right? So in this whole thing, we saw that this small piece of land was owned by Govind, who has 2 sons. So now what will happen? This piece of land will further get bifurcated. So now I'm going to go back to a concept you would have learnt in geography, right? That is subsistence farming, right? What is subsistence farming? How many of you remember this word? Subsistence farming. If you pay attention in my class, I'm sure you will never forget it, right? 10th May again you will learn subsistence farming, right? Now what was subsistence farming? In a small piece of land, you see that high intensity cultivation takes place, right? So pretty much, and what is the whole point of doing that? So that they are able to suffice themselves, right? They are able to provide whatever they need for them, and they try their best to make surplus so that they are able to do some trading also. Great action. I will be your friend, so you pay attention in my class, okay? So now of course from this we understand that there are various types of land ownership, and this has a huge impact, right? Because people who have all this, that 15 people I told you owning majority of the land, we see that they have house, they have land, they have irrigation facilities. That means they have money to get irrigation facilities and tractors and all this modern, things that are necessary. And along with that, because they have so much land, no, they not only produce products for themselves, but they are also able to reap profit. That means from so much land, they will be able to sell it. They will get a lot of money. They will use all that money next year to cultivate it once again. So we see that this profit is used to generate more money or capital so that they can keep making more and more. But what is happening to our remaining 85 people that were there? They are our marginal farmers and small farmers owning very small pieces of land, and they are not getting enough profit, which is why what will happen? Sometimes the amount of money that they do, right? I mean, whatever work that they do, they'll not be able to make so much surplus that they'll go sell in market and get money. They might get little extra. But what ends up happening? We see that they may end up going to some informal sources of credit. So what will they do? They will go and they will reach out for loan, because they are not able to make surplus, sell money and get enough, right? They need to probably take a loan so that they, in the hope that if I borrow this money from maybe somebody, right? And here we're saying informal because it is not under the government, right? It is not under the government. Yes. So in this particular case, what do we see? We see that they'll end up borrowing money thinking that, oh, I will borrow money from this guy. So assuming I'm borrowing money from Ankita ma'am. Okay, you know what? I didn't make enough money now. But if I take 10,000 rupees extra from Ankita ma'am and I buy this high yielding variety, and if I buy one, fertilizer, maybe I will get more crops and then I'll be able to sell it, right? So I'll be able to do that. So at that point, what happens? They end up getting subjected to loan, right? Now, this particular aspect of credit and loan, we learn about the ups and downs of it. But normally what happens is that it can be both good and bad. So here is a case study which is there in your textbook, which is much later, right? About Savita, who is a small farmer. Now she's planning to cultivate around wheat in 1 hectare of land, right? Now what is the reason here is that what do we observe? We see here that apart from fertilizers and pesticides, she requires water and she needs to repair her instruments also, right? Now she thinks that all of this together will require some 3,000 rupees, but she does not have money. So what does she do? She'll go to one bigger farmer whose name is Tejpal Singh. Okay. So Tejpal will be like, fine, I'll give you this 3,000 rupees that you need, but you have to give me interest. Now we've learned about interest, right? Now what is interest? It is basically a percentage or the amount of money that gets added to whatever I am lending you, right? So here we see that he's telling, I'll give you 3,000 rupees, but you also have to give me 24%, right? You have to, after 4 months, it will be charged for 24%. So 4 months, every month 24% is being charged. Very high rate. Normally in banks, it will be maybe 5, maybe 8. But now what do we see? We see that it's going up to 24. Government is not getting involved here. Tejpal is quoting whatever he feels like. I want extra money, I will make money like this, right? So now what will happen? Savita also needs a farm laborer to help her and she has to pay him also. So all in all you see, right? We see that the wage is also pretty low. So at this point, what do we see? It's a pretty tough condition. So in this case, most farmers that are there, we see that they get trapped in these interest rates because farmers are not aware, right? See, when you're in a city or when you're in a town, you realize that you can go to a bank or you can go to a government interested place, right? Or a government trusted place to borrow this money. But in villages and everything, we see that lot of awareness is still pending. Or sometimes banks are only not there for them to go, which is why they feel like, okay, if I ask this guy, I know him, he's a very big person in the village, maybe he will help me. You know, they're very simple-minded and they're very, very innocent and pure at heart like that, right? But there are some people who may take it in the wrong way and end up charging so much more interest. So at this point, if she's borrowing 3,000 rupees and he's charging 24% interest and plus she has to spend all of this, what is she going to get for herself? Nothing, right? At the same time, it will become a vicious cycle which will go on and on and on, right? So we see that at this point, since there is no legal recognition, sometimes there could be there could be some extreme cases, right? So as we all know, it could be that at one point they may end up seizing the land and the property as well. So this right here is one question that you need to understand, right? What is the difference between a person who is a big farmer or a large scale farmer versus small scale and marginal farmers? Are we all clear with this? Yes? Are you all clear? Give me a thumbs up. These are two very important basic understanding. If you have, I'm telling you, 10th standard becomes very easy. You'll score 20 out of 20. I mean, out of an 80 mark paper, 20 out of 20, so you will definitely get in your, this one, economics part. Yes? Are we all clear, everyone? Did you all fall asleep in the live class? Has everybody fallen asleep telling, "Arey ma'am, ye to bahut boring ho gaya"? But these are all very, relevant things that's happening around us, right? See, these are not some stories of the past or anything. These are things that are happening. And at this point, as students, if you are made aware, right? Tomorrow, if you want to become an officer of change, right? Then this will definitely help you. Ha, Kushal? Yes. Ma'am, no chat is allowing us to send message. Oh, okay. It's okay. Come back and watch. See, this is for your benefit only. Whoever falls asleep in class, I can't do anything. Later on in 10th standard, you will only come crying to me telling, "Ma'am, it's so tough." When I'm 9th, I would have made it easy for you, right? I always tell you, I help you at every time because I don't want to just teach you for that one grade. I want to see how that's going to help you later. You imagine, crop production you learnt in 8th. You learned agriculture chapter in 8th. How it is going to help you in 9th and 10th? Trust me, it's very simple and easy, right? Clear? I've made and I've concised this so that you have an understanding, okay? So now, of course, we're going to move into the next aspect, right? So the next aspect that we're going to talk a little bit more about is going to be labor. Now, when we thought about labor, right? Reuma and many others who are saying, "Ma'am, not clear," I'll take your doubt after I do this point, right? Yes. So now when you talk about labor, right, we know labor is a very necessary factor for production. We know that farmers that are there, see, you have your small scale, big scale farmers. Now small scale farmers, they don't have enough money themselves only. They only have to do the work. But what about these large farmers, right? People who own large areas of land. Do you think they will be the ones sitting and, doing all the work? Yes or no? Who do you think would do it in such cases, right? In the case of large scale farmers, yes? We know that in the case of large scale farmers who have huge areas of land, we see that they will employ laborers, right? So they will require laborers for doing the process of farming. So your medium scale and large scale farmers would do the same. So now of course at this point we see that this includes your landless people. Now remember I told you in village of Palampur around 150 families, 1/3 of the population of families do not have land, right? They are landless, which means if they don't have land, they can't practice agriculture. So they are dependent or they are going to be laborers, right? So they will work for daily wages. Now we may think that wages means how much money you are getting paid. But it could also be that these laborers get some meals also. This also again differs from region to region, type of crop as well. And we also see that depending, it's not like it's a fixed job, right? It's not a fixed 9 to 5 job. Or in my case, when you look at your teachers, they come at 8 in the morning, they go at 4, it's fixed for them, right? Fixed employment that is there. Here it is not fixed at this point. There's a lot of, it depends from month on month. Sometimes, there would be months in which they would have no job. Maybe they worked only 2 months in a whole year. So there's a lot of difference that happens. Now there is a comic which is there in your book, right? So there's a comic which is given and I'd like you to read that comic, which is a conversation between Dola and Ramkali, right? So here we see that he says that it's difficult to find work these days. Only large farmers want to hire us and that too for limited number of days. Now here we see that she says Ghanshyam, the large farmer, just bought a harvester also. Now of course we see that earlier at least I could harvest, but now I could help with manual harvesting. But Ghanshyam has now gone and bought one harvester, so he doesn't need me anymore. Which is why last year I worked less than 5 months, right? Now at the same time he says, in my case, we see that my farmer who I was working for, he bought tractor. So now what will I do? Now at this point, even removing weeds, they are applying some weedicide. So they don't need me. So she is like, this year I might have to, go for looking into some other job, maybe brick making in Raiganj. And he says that, what, I actually owe money to a local money lender. I have to give him 2,000 rupees. And I have taken 1,000 rupees. I have taken 1,000 rupees last summer when no work was available. How am I going to repay? Now she is also at a very tough spot, right? Due to the past debt, the money lenders refuse to give money. So now at this point, what happens? What do we understand? We see that there are a lot of things that are happening to these daily wage workers, right? So we see that first and foremost, they are under the mercy of these landlords, right? So we see that they are under the mercy of landlords. They are at the mercy of people who will employ them. And we see that they can go out of job at any point. And along with that, we see that even the conditions are not very ideal. We see that they live under the mercy of their landlords in rural areas. Sometimes if they don't get proper jobs in their area, they're forced to go. They're forced to migrate to towns and cities far away. And now when they go away from their homes, they will have extra expenditure, right? So apart from just, earning money for their family back home, they will also have expenditure, right? And we also know that sometimes they end up finding some jobs in hazardous workspaces, like sometimes in mining and everything, which can also be very dangerous to the life, right? So we see that for landless laborers, there's a lot of conditions, which is why much later you will understand that there's a lot of protection schemes which are involved. Yes? So this is one aspect that you will have to keep in mind, okay, when it comes to laborers, because they can ask you this particular question. They are not giving you an in-depth explanation. They have given it to you with respect to a comic, but they will ask you, right, what exactly is there, right? So they'll ask you, how is it that landless laborers, what is the situation of landless laborers? Why are they forced to migrate to cities or towns? So they can ask you a 2-mark question in that aspect as well. So everybody, please keep a point at this. Yes? Very good. So now we're moving on to the last part of it, as to how can production become a little more labor friendly. Now at this point we see that if we want to be labor friendly, we know that the government has to get involved, right? So a lot of government policies are there wherein if a laborer does not, you learn about it in your higher grades, this is just an extra information, but normally what do we see is that especially government policies are involved where in case if a daily wage worker does not get a job, right, they will guarantee that at least for 100 days they give him some minimum wages so that he can survive until he gets a new job. And we learn more about it when we talk about sectors in Indian economy, where we learned about how there are, you know, two categories of it. Yes. So now of course everybody, wages and salary. Salary is like a fixed amount, right? So salary is something where I'm a salaried employee. That means that there is a fixed amount that's coming to me. Wages is being paid on a daily basis, right? Not much difference, like slight one. Yes, exactly. This is there in government policies also. Very good. Ma'am, do we have to remember the names? No, you don't have to remember the names, but they may ask you situation-based questions, which you need to pay attention to. Now, the last part of it here is, of course, sale of surplus farm products, right? So, as we all know, when in the case of large-scale farmers, they have surplus products which they are able to sell and make money out of it. But in the case of small scale farmers, they don't have the ability to build that much surplus, which is why at this point we see that they are dependent on maybe larger farmers for money, right? So with this everybody, we are done with 90% of the chapter. Now we are going to the last part of the chapter where we are going to learn about some of the non-farming activities, right? So it's not that in a village only farming activities happen, just that Palampur is an agrarian society where 75% is dependent on agriculture, while the remaining 25% is focused on non-farming activities, right? So at this point, we see that some of the non-farming activities include dairy, small-scale farming, shopkeeping, and transportation, right? So when you talk about dairy farming, we know that many people are, especially in Palampur, are involved in dairy farming. People feed their buffaloes with various kind of cattle feed as well, so that they are able to, so we learned, right? They grow jowar and bajra so that they can make it as cattle feed. And then of course, whatever milk they get, they will sell it nearby so that they are able to make money. Yes. Similarly, in the case of whether you talk about small scale manufacturing, we know that a small group of people, small scale means it is not a huge manufacturing unit. It is a small manufacturing unit where a small amount of people come together and they produce. It could be, it could be like small toys which are being sold, just giving you an example. But we see that at this point, we see that small scale manufacture happens, right? And we see that less than 50 people are involved in this particular process of manufacture. Not rarely laborers are hired. Then of course we have transportation, where of course in the beginning we saw that there's access to buses and all of that, right? We know that there are buses, bullock carts and everything. And shopkeeping as well, where we see that for basic groceries, there are shopkeepers who are there. But why is these non-farming activities important? That is something that they will ask, right? Why are non-farming activities important? Because first and foremost, as much as farming activities are necessary because they bring in raw materials, your non-farming opportunities or your non-farming activities also bring in a lot of employment opportunities, right? If I have a shop, I need one shopkeeper to help me out. In the case of cattle farming, or in case of, maybe a small scale industry, I'm able to employ 40-50 people. And it also brings in services. How does quality of life become better? Not just by having everything, even the service that you have, right? Today, if you are able to go from one place to another in auto, right? If you're able to just use an app and book the auto, right? Or in case if you just want to go to the mall, those are all small things that makes life better, right? It improves the quality of life. So we see that it brings in services as well. And along with that, we also observe that especially in rural India, the digitalization is happening. So introduction of all this, internet and everything makes people a little more aware, makes them a little more tech savvy, which means that they'll be more aware and connected. And of course, we know that transport brings in connections, right? So people are able to, there's access to the village. That means people are able to come and go. So it's not just for people, even goods can be transported as well. So everyone, with this, as promised, in 1.5 hours, I have finished this chapter, right? So quickly to summarize, right? What did we learn? Oh, before I summarize, here's a quick question for all of you. Identify the non-farming activities from the following: shipping, tilling, harvesting, and retail business, right? Ma'am, does poultry farming come under this? See, farming here, like we said, is mainly, see, again, it's not, it doesn't say non-agriculture, it says non-farming. Farming deals with crop production, right? So poultry can also come. ठीक है. Two answers are there, A and D. Exactly. So shipping and retail business that is there comes under this particular category. So of course, with this, everybody, quickly to summarize, right? We learned about what is production, we learned about how we produce, we learned about why do we produce, then we also learned about who all are involved in production, and of course how we can be production friendly. Then we also learned at the end of how there are farming and non-farming activities and how they benefit us. So with this, everyone, we are going to be signing off. So here's a quick homework for all of you where I need you to tell me 3 negative impacts of green revolution, right? So this is a very simple question which is going to be there for 3 marks. So I need you to let me know in the comments of this video. Now, of course, students, if you enjoyed this particular class, you let me know in the comments as well, because I've tried my best to make sure that I've summarized, simplified this chapter for you, because it's your first idea into economics and I don't want you feeling that, ma'am, it's not something I can do, right? So I've tried to make it as easy as possible. So everybody, let me know in the comments of this video if you enjoyed it. And you know, Byju's 9th and 10th has got you covered no matter what. So if you enjoy what we do not forget to hit the like button on this video and do not forget to hit the subscribe button. And thank you so much for being a part of today's class. I will see you all soon, but up until then, take care, lots of love, and bye-bye.